to, first and foremost, thank you, Mahindra. Mahindra is an inspiration to me and to several people out here because he's a role model that you can do well and you can do good. And the idea that even within the small little pokey town of Cincinnati, we have enough capability to actually not just make a difference to ourselves, but make a difference to the community is such an exciting idea. And just like we've had the opportunity to do something with students on Inter-Alliance, I'm really, really hoping that today's movement, it is not about Mahindra, it's not about me, it's not about the book, although please go buy the book. It is truly about what we can do once we kind of join hands and create an ecosystem. So again, I wanted to thank you for that, and also thank Chris and Uday and Pauli and the entire team here for giving me the opportunity finally to come to this theater. Thank you. So if we're all set up there, what I'd like to do is tell you why this is probably the most exciting time in each of your careers. And I want to do that by basically sharing from my own career on how, even after about 30 years and feeling like, oh, I've seen and done everything there is to be done about technology, I've come to the realization that I absolutely know nothing yet. And there's so much that's possible if we can only put 2 or 3 things together. And that's really the story that I'd like to share with you. But for those of you that are, and you don't have to be an IT manager, I know many of you are just supporters of technology. I want to kind of ask you a question, and I want to show 2 videos to make the point. If you had complete control on what you do with technology, would you choose the first option of customer service or the second?
Welcome to the Automated IT Support Center. Our menu has recently changed. Please listen to all the options before selecting. For email-related issues, please press 1. For printing-related issues, please press 2. For server-related issues, please press 3. For database-related issues, please press 4. For intranet-related issues, please press 29. For website-related issues, please press 30. You can now choose an option from our menu. In your own words, please describe the issue you are experiencing with printing.
I'm unable to...
Start speaking now.
I'm unable to connect.
All right, so that's option 1. And this is option 2.
Mon oreille?
Yeah, put it in your ear.
Comme ça?
Yeah.
Ok.
Can you hear me in French?
Pouvez-vous me entendre en français?
Ah oui. Mais je peux t'entendre parler français? Mais c'est
Yes,
génial.
I can hear you talk French.
Attends, comment ça se fait? C'est
But this is awesome. But how you do it?
Yeah, it's translating. It's translating.
So this is a technology from a small little company called Waverly Labs in the UK. And what they do is, as the guy on the left-hand side there speaks in English, there is a earpiece that actually translates in French in real time. By the way, that guy's the CEO, that lady is his French girlfriend, and his entire motivation for doing this was because he couldn't speak French. Now, that's fine, but the question I have for you is, would you rather not have technology that belongs to the second category rather than the first? And the obvious answer is yes, of course we would. But there's a lot of stuff that stands in our way. This is why digital transformations fail. We all have day jobs. We all have so many things that happen around us, and there's so many pitfalls. So how do you kind of get around that issue? And that's really the story that I want to share with you today, which is kind of going back to my own experience from Procter & Gamble, of actually having done some dramatic changes to the way we run our global business services operations, and try and connect the dots together against the bigger theme that, trust me, this is probably the best time in each of your careers, okay? And these are some examples of the kind of changes that we did at Procter & Gamble while I was there. Asking some, what may sound like pretty crazy questions, but for internal operations, why should you even have something called travel and expenses, right? You have data. Why do you need people, and why do you need forms? Can we do real-time supply chain planning, finally, end-to-end, across the entire spectrum? You know, call centers, you know, purchasing, legal, can you use AI for that? And I will get back to some of that later on. But I know that the bigger question is actually not would you like to do that, but how do you go about it? And that's really where I'm going to try and spend most of my time today. Yeah? But I need to back up and do a little bit of introductions. Yes, that is me. There is a trend these days, I notice, on LinkedIn and Facebook to put pictures of yourself that were just a little, you know, younger than you are, just to kind of, you know, get your best picture out there. Well, that one is mine, okay? That's when I was at my peak. I had dark, curly, good hair, and it's all been downhill since then, so there, okay? But no, in all seriousness, I've had the immense pleasure of having served in this great company called Procter & Gamble for over 27 years, 35 years in the industry, and having done many, many things. I had the opportunity of essentially growing up with the IT industry. I had the opportunity of essentially setting up the first ever shared services offshore center in the Philippines in 1993, of being program leader for the outsourcing of 2/3 of GBS and IT at Procter & Gamble in 2003. That was a 10-year, $8 billion deal. And then, you know, integrating the Gillette company into P&G and, you know, so on and so forth. And then actually having run operations of IT and global business services in every region of the world with Procter & Gamble, before spending the last 3 years of my life questioning whether I need to undo everything that I've done because the world is changing. And that's really some of the examples that I talked about earlier. Right? In the few minutes that we have today, what I thought I'd do is give you a little bit of context for this particular story, right? Talk a little bit about what led me to actually deciding that, yeah, I think I need to undo everything I've done in my past at Procter & Gamble and do things differently this time again. And what drives that? And then what can you learn and what can you take from some of the mistakes that I made, yeah? Number one lesson for each one of you. If you always thought of your competition as another similar sized or larger company, think again, because your competition today is most likely the startup. Large companies aren't losing market share to other large companies anymore. They're losing market share to real, small, nimble startup companies. Yeah? And by the way, that actually shows up in all benchmarks. We tend in each of our organizations to benchmark with other similar sized companies and their cost structures. I picked up this benchmark of, and I apologize, this is just IT, but you know, IT in large companies. And you know, we all felt good while I worked that we were best in class, until I tried to put together data on if I actually didn't benchmark against similar companies, but if I benchmarked against startups, what would it look like? The real benchmark would be half of what we have and 10 times the agility. Yeah? And this isn't a business problem. I would tell you that this is an IT and a finance and a legal and a manufacturing. It is all of our problems. Yes? Because we need to rewire the way we run our companies. We need to do things differently. And that's really led me to kind of say, in the area of IT and global business services, where P&G was considered to be best in class, because in the industry spectrum, we were stage 3, and stage 3 was supposed to be best. But if stage 3 gets me to about 2 times the cost structure and a 10th the agility for startup, there has to be a stage 4. And if the industry doesn't have one, we're going to have to create it. And that's when we created this organization called Next Generation Services, with the intention of actually disrupting the way we operate, yeah? Because it's not a choice anymore. And that's really the story with some of the examples that I kind of shared with you. So that was the context. Now, if you humor with me, I'm going to share many slides that may sound familiar to you, but I'm going to connect the dots on why that's important. This is the journey that I went through about 4 years ago, and I want to connect the dots on, I think, why some of this is still applicable today. But I want to start with a video first. if this plays again.
Take a look at this. It's the world's smallest computer. Developed by the University of Michigan, the micromote can fit on the edge of a nickel. Cubed, it's only 1 millimeter in size. Capable of taking pictures, reading temperatures, and recording pressure, the device is charged and programmed via light. High-frequency strobe lights send information to the computer, which then sends info back to a central computer using radio frequencies. Doctors are reportedly very interested in the computer because it can be injected into the body to perform ECGs and take pressure and temperature readings. But they're not the only ones. The oil industry has also shown interest. The computer can be inserted into oil wells to detect any lingering oil left to be extracted. Researchers see the invention as a way to never lose anything again. By attaching it to a key or wallet, users will always be able to find those important possessions. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Emily Murray.
What this video is about is a news clip from a small news channel called Newsy that talks about the smallest computer in the world. This is actually about 2 years ago, and it talks about the University of Michigan and how they have created a computer that's actually smaller than a grain of rice. Awesome. I had the opportunity while I was at P&G a few months after that to work with IBM Labs on something that they've already announced on their version of the smallest computer in the world. And that one was 10 times smaller than this. It was about the size of the thickness of a human hair, right? The crazy thing was this is not a sensor, this is not a device. This is a fully fledged computer. So for those of us, and I realize I'm older than many of the people here, but for those of us that remember the IBM XT and the AT, that's the capacity, capability of these computers. But that's not even the craziest part about this. The crazy part about the work that we did with them was the intended price point of that smallest computer in the world was going to be 2 cents. Now ask yourself, what if you took a whole handful of those computers? What if you put each one of those on every bottle that you create? What would that do to your internal operations? I'm not talking about IT, I'm talking about supply chain, I'm talking about finance. I'm talking about your legal department, your marketing, right? That's what's happening as a result of some of these changes. And although my slide isn't as picturesque as what Rajiv shared, it's exactly that. This is exactly what's behind the revolution, which is the fourth industrial revolution. And as a result of that, you have the statistics today where if you look at the number of companies based on market valuation, 5 of the top 10 in the world are actually tech companies. And by the way, that does not even include Alibaba and Amazon, which are arguably tech companies masquerading as whatever you want to call them, right? And 8 years ago, that list had only 1. And it's not just company valuation. If you look at work processes, if you look at functions, if you look at manufacturing, Zara now delivers from design to shelf in 2 weeks. And again, it's not just manufacturing. Let's take a look at R&D. Xiaomi produces a new batch, and I'm not talking about software versions. You can create as many versions as you want in a day. I'm talking about new batches of phone every week. And again, it's not just about functions. It's also about entire industries, because most industries are dramatically changing around us. And by the way, it's not just the stuff that you do at work, it's also the stuff that you do in personal life that's changing, because as you can see there, the most personal of services, this is where you want to go to a human being rather than a software, is starting to be done by algorithms as well, right? And the net of all of this is the impact that it has on society. If you have as many people as you see out there that are going to be less capable than technology on basic reading and writing, right? And if that's the case, if that's what's happening around us, what do you do? Now, so the advice I'm giving you is not to walk out of here and hug anybody that you see out there that looks halfway like a robot, that's a water heater, by the way, and say, I love you, robot. That's not what I'm talking about. The broader message is, you know, sometimes kids are intuitively smarter than we are. Embrace technology. As an aside, when the robots rule the world, it's going to help you. No, that's just a joke. I mean, don't worry about that. I think that's a red herring. The point is that technology is inevitable, just like electricity and the steam engine and many of the other things were. It doesn't mean that it is without risks. It doesn't mean that it is without dangers. But one thing that I promise you from history is that it is inevitable, right? And you have to find ways to make it work for you. And that's basically why I call this interesting stage in which we find ourselves, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, right? And that's what's given rise to terms like digital transformation and digital disruptions. And if you are a halfway smart technology company, you take whatever product that you're selling, which could be email, by the way, and you rebrand it as digital transformation, and your sales go up 20%, right? But you don't need to do that. You don't need to do that because I think we can all learn on how to enable that transformation. The only real digital transformation is one that makes your enterprise, which is hopefully very, very successful in the third industrial revolution, to continue to be successful in the fourth revolution. That's called digital transformation. Everything else is a tool, is a process, is an enabler, right? And that's really where I kind of get into the framework, not pitching the book, but in the book, where I talk about grades of the different stages of digital transformation. And so you have to know exactly what you're buying. Yeah? Which brings me back full circle to my story at Procter & Gamble. So 3 years ago, I went out and talked to 100 different companies, startups, venture capitalists, peer companies, Silicon Valley companies, trying to understand what's happening in the space of business operations. And I found amazing stories. I found stories of companies that basically have no back offices at all and still run a $10 million operations across 10 countries, right? I came across tweets that talked about how ShotSpotter, this technology, was able to hold people accountable. I don't know if you guys are familiar with ShotSpotter, but this is a technology that uses AI and audio to triangulate in real time within an accuracy of 10 square meters whenever a shot is fired in the city, okay? That was a couple of years ago. In the city of Cincinnati, we're not talking about London, New York, Geneva, or Tokyo. We're talking about Cincinnati, right? This stuff is all around us. So anybody that tells you that technology is not ready, they're full of it, because technology is never going to be 100% ready. It's what you do with it that's important, right? And that was a key lesson that I learned, which is there is a lot of reason to be skeptical about what technology can do. Ask any IT professional, and I've been an IT professional all my life. People will tell you that whatever problem you're trying to solve is always going to be in the next release of whatever software. Just wait, you're going to get it, right? But then you have situations like this. So again, this was 2015, and I was trying to talk to these 100 different organizations, including a person now who's a friend of mine, AJ Brustein, who's the CEO of a company, and we were playing telephone and email tag in terms of trying to set up a meeting. And he said, how about this week? I said, well, I'm not available this week, how about next? And he said, fine, copying Amy, who I assumed was his admin, to set up that, and then Amy sent an email. And then I know this is a very, very boring story, except that when you click on Amy's signature, bottom left, Amy is a robot. Read that email again. Perfect English. But more than that, when I say I'm not available next week, on Friday, April 10th, none of the options Amy generates is for the week after that. This was 2015. The most personal of services, the most sensitive services in a company is the admin of a CEO. That was Amy. What reason do we have to think that technology is not here? Oh, it is here. Okay. It is never going to be here. We're asking the wrong questions. It's not technology, it's use cases. There are narrow use cases like that are perfectly good enough for use. And there's no reason for us not to use that. And that's when we came together and put together this organization called Next Generation Services. And what I did was very simple. I said, we're going to be an organization that's like Google X, the Google organization that does driverless cars and all that kind of stuff, right? So 10x disruption. We're going to focus on not technology, but use cases. And the way I'm going to do that is basically by starting with any problem that's sponsored and is part of the strategy of an operations organization. I'm not going to look for cool technology and find ways to bring it in. I'm going to start with strategic problems and find 10x solutions to that. And the way I'm going to do that is as much as possible for free of cost, because I'm a cheap bastard. And the way we did that was basically we brought together only about a dozen out of 15,000 people in global business services. Excuse me. But these were people that had deep operational expertise. They were not innovators. They were people who had a lot of credibility and experience of running stuff. So if they said, you can change this at 10x, not 10%, 10 times, then the whole organization knew that they could do it. Okay? Then we offered many of the large companies, including the IBMs and HPs and EYs and Ascendums, to be part of that network. And then we offered the top 10 venture capitalists in the country, the Sequoias and Andreessens and stuff like that, a partnership, and we said, we don't want your money. What we want is access to your startups. And the whole business model is very simple. I start with a strategic problem, not with an ivory tower issue. How can I get rid of something that people love to do, expense reports? I give that problem to a venture capitalist, and they say, I have 3 different technology companies that are working on that. I bring it back, and I ask the IBMs and the Ascendums, anybody want to work on this? Because if you're willing to make it successful, based on design thinking and experience of my hardcore operations experts, for free, I'm not going to pay you, but if you're successful, I will give you the intellectual property to sell to anybody else you want in the world. Yeah. And so that's basically the model that we took. And I won't go through all of those examples because of time, but here's one, how to use artificial intelligence for accounts receivables. You have accounts receivable, so let's take a situation. You have, let's say, Procter & Gamble and Walmart. We sell them stuff worth $1,000, and they come back and say, fine, here's your payment, and it ends up only being $900. And you say, why? They say, well, that's all we got. And so what happens typically is a dance between their accounts payables team and your accounts receivables team, because they say, oh, we're right, yeah? And this is a big, big issue in most companies, except that when we went and found an algorithm, an AI algorithm, it could predict with more accuracy than any of our humans could whether the given claim was valid or not. Right? And then you can use your people to do other stuff, increase the pace of operations, free up more cash, right? So that's basically the whole model, which actually then brings me, I guess, to the most important part of this session, which is, fine. You could do that in a certain situation, but what can we do now? And I'd like to leave you with maybe 3 pieces of advice. The biggest issue of our times is actually not technical skills. It is a technical mindset. The mindset that you can actually do something with technology. And I don't care if you're like Mickey out there, who's the most technical guy in the world, who can write AI programs. We don't have to be like Mickey. We have to tell our organization that we believe that we can envision the possibilities and we can make things happen, rewire processes, rewire business models. The second is I stole shamelessly from this model called 70-20-10, which Google has used for some time, which is 70% of the organization's capacity is put against day-to-day operations, 20% against continuous improvement, and 10% on stuff like Google X to disrupt them. Right? That ratio doesn't have to be 70-20-10. In my case, like I said, I'm cheap, so that 10% didn't even be 10%. But the fact of the matter is that for companies to survive and thrive in an industrial revolution, if you don't have a parallel stream that actively disrupts yourself in parallel to running your operations and improving it, then you're just dead. You just don't know it. Yeah. You have to have a plan, a strategic plan for each of those 3 buckets. And I know it sounds really, really stupid and simple, but it's amazing how many companies don't have that, or organizations. And then the third is use your ecosystem.
Over 350 teams from around the globe submitted to enter. 10 were selected to bring their technology to compete. Every single one a fresh idea. And the best of the best earns a $1 million prize.
So you guys are probably familiar with the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, maybe about 10 years ago. Terrible disaster. And the big oil companies, BP and everybody, came in and said, hey, we don't know how to fix it, so let's do an X Prize. And X Prize is this organization that basically offers like $1 million and opens up problems to the entire world to solve, right? So, things like, how do you do, cheap spacecraft to Mars, stuff like that, right? They put an X Prize, and there are small companies that won it. The amazing thing about that story, the 2 guys in the company that came up with that idea that was eventually used, one of them was a dentist, the other one was a tattoo artist. None of them had any experience in oil, spills, or Gulfs of Mexico. Your most disruptive ideas will come from the ecosystem, not from your traditional experts in the organization, right? That's why in the NGS team, I needed the startups. I didn't need the experts. I needed people that would give me crazy ideas, and then I could kill many of them very quickly so that I could get to the few big ones, right? And really, those are the 3 things that I'd like to leave with you. Distinguish the 20, which is the continuous improvement, from the 10, and have a plan. Leverage the external ecosystem, and really set up a portfolio of innovations, not just 1 or 2 big ideas, right? We ran always disruptive portfolios, 8 or 10 of these, And my role was that of a venture capitalist. I killed about 5 of them because they didn't move quickly enough. And then the other 4 out of 5 ended up being a 2x, not a 10x, but then one of them was a 10x. And each of these killing things had to happen very quickly, within weeks, not months, right? That's how venture capitalists operate. That's not what PMI project management teaches you, but that's not what's necessary for the 10. That's helpful for the 20, right? You have to have a different mindset. But wait, there's more. Having been influenced thoroughly by late night TV advertising, there's another factor that I thought I'd share with you, which is that, but even when you do all that stuff, 70% of digital transformations still fail. And by the way, this is a $1.2 trillion industry. So you're talking about close to $1 trillion of economic impact based on this. And really that's what I try to cover. The answer in the book is the surprising reason why most digital transformations fail is A, because buzz and hype and misunderstanding has led the term to be co-opted. So you cannot differentiate sustainable living DNA type change, of which Netflix is an example, or Google is an example, from the next AI tool, which is going to automate your accounts receivables. There are 5 stages of digital transformation, and you have to be extremely clear about which digital transformation you want to go after. Simple, but that's one. The second is that every piece of methodology on how to execute that I learned throughout my 30-year career, when applied to this 10% projects, was wrong. These 10% projects take very different mindsets, very different processes, and methodologies to execute. And therefore, the surprising reasons why 70% of digital transformations fail is actually discipline. It's not technology. It is not creativity. It is discipline. The first thing Google X does when they get a big idea that they're going to add to their portfolio of, they run only about, I think, 30 projects. Balloon Internet, Google, this driverless car, the eye thing that allows you to see, crazy stuff. The first thing they do when they decide to add a new project to that list is put a finance manager on the job. Not a technologist, not a project manager, a finance manager. And things get even more disciplined after that, right? Therefore, the surprising discipline. So I liken this a little bit to my favorite analogy, which is Alice in Wonderland, where Alice asks the Cheshire Cat, which way do I go? The Cheshire Cat says, where do you want to go? She said, I don't care. Then he says, it doesn't really matter which way you go. And that's what happens in boardrooms with conversations on, oh, you got to do AI. It's like, yeah, for what? Oh, don't really care. Just do something good. It's like, okay, I will. Right? So, and that's really the 5 stages of digital transformation, everything from building the foundation all the way through making digital transformation the living DNA of your entire organization. And within that, I outlined 10 disciplines, which I hear. And some of these terminologies are again, their English meaning is very different from some of the descriptions that I have there. But I would encourage us to kind of think of how can we make this insight of discipline rather than technology being the missing link, a core of what we do as we try and make this the absolute best times of our careers. So with that, what I'd like to share is a video that talks about how in the Middle East, camel jockeying, which used to be an ancient Arab tradition, still is there, is being replaced by robots. These robots basically, have a small little whip, and they get instructions and they use AI, and they're actually replacing, the terrible tradition of actually having small kids race these camels, right?
Usually, when you go to the races, you expect to see jockeys atop their valuable mounts. But at camel races in the United Arab Emirates, the riders aren't people, they're robots. Camel racing is an ancient tradition in the Arab world, but mechanical jockeys used today have only been around for a decade or so. The jockeys weigh about 6.5 pounds. They come equipped with a walkie-talkie so the camel can take directions, and a small whip, which is activated by a remote control. For the camel's trainers, getting the right commands in is a race in itself. SUVs drive alongside the track while trainers punch in orders for the robots from the passenger seat. And it's not easy to keep pace with the animals. Camels tend to average about 25 miles per hour over the course of a race. The robots aren't just a clever engineering feat, they're also a solution to a serious human rights problem associated with camel racing. For decades, camel jockeys were small children who were often trafficked from other countries and were subject to serious abuse, as well as the dangers associated with riding on such a fast animal. The UAE banned the practice in 2005, and though it wasn't completely eradicated, adding robot jockeys presented a viable alternative for camel owners. So when owners cash in big prizes after race wins, they'll have little robots to thank. Hardly something their ancestors could have predicted. For Newsy, I'm Carter Wadil.
And so if Amy the robot, your admin assistant, could be an AI, if accounts receivables decisions could be made by technology, and if camels can be driven by robots, I promise you there's absolutely no reason in the world why you couldn't do better and make the coming years the absolute best opportunities of your careers. Thank you.
Digital transformation. You can create a great app, but how do you create all the underlying processes to match the culture change? Is that, I'm not asking for some simple formula. Are there any tips that both of you can share? Like examples of this is how we did it.
Do you like that?
For us, it was just creating business proof points. And, most companies, two things matter, growth and efficiency. And, using Tony's approach, there's a portfolio of initiatives that address both. But it's about being in the front lines, driving growth, driving business model innovation, and leading with that. And I'll give you an example. For health insurance, for us, it's all about premiums. And we said, well, if we're going to be in the business of serving and creating health, then we need to create a subscription revenue model for that. So we work with a CFO. We're essentially saying, in addition to the traditional things of how many lives you cover and what's your risk premium revenue, what's your medical loss ratio, et cetera, we said let's introduce a new term to the market, which is around what subscription revenue do you have for the services we're creating. And that's really got nothing to do with the technology and AI or blockchain or any of the things that we typically talk about. It's about how do you reset the mindset from an investor standpoint to start caring about this. And once you lay the breadcrumbs into how this all translates into the balance sheet and show incremental total shareholder return of the things you're doing, then the transformation, Google's example of putting the financial manager is exactly spot on. I'd say raise that up a level and start every transformation effort with the CFO.
I fully agree with Rajiv's points. I'm glad you said there's no magic answer because there is none. But there are three things that I have seen. I happen to be part of MIT's Future of Work program that's trying to solve the world's problems on future of work. The first thing is that every company needs to have a plan. And I know that sounds very simplistic, but it's amazing to see actually that people are starting to do that. AT&T announced 3 or 4 years ago they were setting aside $1 billion to retrain 100,000 people. Amazon announced recently that they were setting aside $700 million to retrain 100,000 people, which sounds counterintuitive because if you think of Amazon, you're thinking job losses. Yes, they have introduced 200,000 robots, but they have hired 300,000 people at the same time. And even the new capability people they've hired, they have now a plan, including academy of courses on programming and AI to retrain them. So the first point is have a plan. By the way, this isn't just tech companies. Loblaws, the Canadian retailer, has set aside $250 million to retrain their people, right? And so if companies don't get that, then they're going to take the easy way out, which is the second way this is handled, which is what most companies then do, which is a terrible thing, is then they do, layoffs and rehires, which is absolutely stupid. That's the worst form of transformation. Private equity companies and turnaround artists will use that to short-term gain, but it's never really going to work. Right? And the third thing I'd like to suggest is an interesting strategy called a third, which many companies are starting to look at, which is what they do is basically say, over the next 3 or 5 years, through attrition and performance management, we will let go of a third of our people. Now, whether that ratio is right or wrong, who knows? I mean, but there's some percentage that will never make it. And it's fair to assume that there will be a percentage that will never make it, right? Then they set aside money, like Amazon and others, to retrain the remaining people, so the 2/3 of the people. And then they actually end up hiring about 1/3 of the population back with new skills, right? So these are just strategies that companies are adopting, and there's honestly no silver bullet. But the first step is to recognize that this is an inevitable problem, and use many of the techniques and tips that Rajiv was also providing here.
Other questions? I think everybody wants dessert. Let's do that.
Sounds like a plan.